and welcome back to Radio 2. So today we're continuing where we left off in the previous class, which was part 1 of compiling news, sport, weather, and traffic. So today we're continuing with that journey. Once again, we'll be making use of both textbooks. So if you want to follow along in Beyond Powerful Radio, we'll be looking at page 237 up until page 258. And in Next Level Radio, we'll be looking at page 208 up until page 210, so 210. In the previous lecture, we looked at news as a whole. We mentioned that there are 4 pillars, and that is the news, sport, weather, and traffic. And we said that news is the segment of content that a listener can obtain every hour in a neatly packed bulletin. And sport, on the other hand, is important because it's a particular type of news that garners a lot of interest from any listener base. And there's so much to write about and to share about when it comes to sport. And then we said that we need weather and we need traffic updates because every person is in some way or another affected by the weather or the traffic, because we all wake up in the morning and want to plan our day with as much efficiency and as much pleasure as possible. So we have a broad idea about the 4 pillars, of which we've been looking at news. But what happens in an emergency? If something massive was to hit right now, do you know what to do? Are you prepared for it? So like we said in the previous lecture, there are 2 different types of journalists. News broadcasting is really 2 separate jobs. The first is covering that big story, and the other is covering everything else. So let's talk about that big story in case of an emergency. Imagine the worst. If a radio station has limited news staff and most of the programming is syndicated or voice tracked, how will you best serve your audience if an earthquake strikes, a record-breaking blizzard, or a snowstorm hits, or there's a fast-moving tornado, or a fire, or a flood, a toxic spill, or a crazed gunman at a local school? Are you prepared? What would you do? When disaster strikes, how can you be at your best, or at least not at your worst? What a lot of stations have been doing is they've been partnering up with TV stations, making sure that they're able to pool their resources if anything happens, to be able to still best serve their community. Since you can't predict whose transmitter will still be functioning in certain types of emergencies, it's a good idea to arrange in advance for any stations in your cluster or in your area that have news staffs to record reports for stations that don't. Because normally when these kind of disasters strike, we tend to not have enough staff members to cover everything that's happening, especially in the evenings. Everyone in your building where you are situated should learn how to handle an emergency news situation should one arise. Just as you can train a fire drill, practice a news drill with everyone in your company, with everyone around you, so you'll have an all hands on deck when you need them. If we look at Geller Media International's emergency preparedness points, that's here on the screen, does your staff know how to maintain credibility in order to collect, gather, and verify that information is correct before it goes on air? Does your staff know how to get in touch with local authorities on the scene who can give you credible information? Do you have a list with everyone's numbers? Have you made your staff save numbers like these on their phones? What is the right time and place for listener calls? What role should Twitter and other social media play in disaster or major event coverage? In an emergency, credibility and correct information are vital. If someone calls and tells you it's safe to go into a building where a shooting took place, but it turns out that one of the gunmen is still inside, you may have made the situation worse. If you broadcast the wrong information, such as reporting on the death or the injury of a person who's neither dead nor injured, you can cause unnecessary pain and suffering to their families, and there are legal issues. This is why extra caution should be used when giving names of people affected by a disaster before they have been officially confirmed. You'll need to make sure that every member that you work with understands that he or she will be expected to get the names of people they talk to and, where possible, the locations of emergency situations. Regular programming and how to turn on a microphone. This may seem quite obvious, but a Board Op 101 training seminar should be part of basic employment orientation if you have a very small operation, or if you work for a very small operation, where there might not be a professionally trained engineer or news or on-air personality available in an emergency. From a management point of view, managers should be clear about what they can and can't ask of non-broadcast staff. While it may be reasonable to expect a professional reporter to get up in the middle of the night and come into the station when a big story breaks, it may not be reasonable or safe to request the same thing of your sales or traffic personnel, for example. Someone needs to be the one who will make the decisions about whether wall-to-wall coverage is needed or if periodic updates make more sense. Know in advance who that person will be. Have a chain of command. Rita Rich offers a checklist of what your staff will need, or what the staff that you work with will need. However, first she suggests assemble a book of contacts and email addresses, complete with telephone numbers to call should your computers go down, and include things like your emergency number operations center, the police department, the fire and rescue media relations or public affairs office direct and cell numbers, the home and cell number of public information officers for after hours. Have a staff checklist. Make certain everyone on your staff is familiar with news or press releases. Don't assume the person in the building when something happens will know. Have a ready page of contact for your local hospitals and for their emergency operations centers. Know and list which local weather service personnel or weather information services your station has contracted with. While Twitter, instant messaging, and other forms of social media such as YouTube can be useful, Rita Rich warns the information must be verifiable. Jerry Bell also recommends that you keep a how-to guide in your studio for emergencies. Here's his advice for how that should work. Have a plan. Keep it in a red binder marked emergency in your studio. You can also put it on a computer, but what happens when the power goes out? Also, you can tear pages out of a binder if you need to. A lot of stations already have a printout and/or a computer file of emergency contact phone numbers, including cell numbers of firefighters and police. But it's useless unless everyone in the building knows how to get a hold of it. Copies of the emergency plan should also be in the general manager's office and the program director's office. Let's look at Jerry Bell's emergency binder. Number 1, emergency numbers and contacts in a place where everyone can find it. Take the time to compile a list of contacts for people with police, fire, hospital, utility companies, and your security company if you have one. Get more than office numbers. You need cell phone numbers and email and Twitter contacts. It will take a little time to get an initial list, but once you have one, test call every 6 months to make sure the numbers are still current. Make sure you have numbers of people who are designated to go on the air. Number 2, a map of where staffers live and numbers where they can be reached 24/7. Know where your staff live. Whoever is the closest to an event can head towards the scene. Since they work with you, you can trust their information. They can also explain local landmarks and help describe where something is taking place. They may even know people who live nearby. Number 3, guidelines for crisis coverage interviews. So managers should manage and stay off the air. In a disaster situation, management is critical. Listeners should hear voices that they are used to. Your regular presenter can handle the air work. A manager needs to listen to what's going out or over the air and make decisions that guide the coverage. Okay, so stay calm, take notes, and limit speculation. When talking to the public, ask what they can see, hear, or smell. Does the caller have any expertise to comment on a particular aspect of what might be taking place? If someone tells you what they think or what they believe, remember to say you'll check it out with authorities. Do not accept it as a fact. Check with emergency professionals on a continuous basis. Ask them about observations from callers. Take notes. Repeat frequently what you've been told. Set the scene every 10 minutes. Put yourself in the place of someone who lives nearby. What would you want to know? That's what you should be asking. If possible, have someone screen calls. If it's not possible, whether someone is you can get information on this from the government. Sometimes the simple information is the best information you can impart in an emergency. Number 5, instructions about when to dump commercials. For instance, you wouldn't want to broadcast an ad for an airline in the middle of coverage about a plane crash. Number 6, you need street maps of your area. Invest in a good quality street map. It helps to pinpoint where something's taking place. If you have power, obviously you can use a computer, or Google Maps is a computer with Google Maps, or you can even use your phone with Google Maps. But if you don't have power, you're going to need that map. Do, however, make sure that you have a TV monitor in studio. If there is TV coverage, it helps if your on-air person can see what's happening. And lastly, number 7, create a mission statement for what you want your station to do during a disaster. If there is a disaster, what do you expect? Spell out your expectations. Then provide a framework for decision making. First order of business is to get a general manager or a program director involved ASAP. During the crisis, Alan Asenson warns that even if you're faced with a frantic public and a panicked manager, it's almost never a good idea to simply start throwing callers on the air. If your station does not normally use live phone calls, it's still a good idea to make sure your phone system is wired so it can go live on air and that it has a delay. Remember, as a station, you can plan in advance, especially stations without news departments. Get a press pass. If you have a van you use for remote broadcasts or promotions or sales events, consider getting closer to the scene and anchoring coverage from there. A lot of cities require a press pass for vehicles to get to a disaster scene, so make sure you have such a permit. And local press passes for some of your staff are also a great idea. Develop a clock. Develop a broadcast clock and stick to it during the time of emergency. In an emergency situation, regular time checks are important. For emergencies lasting days, time, day, date, and even a year can help a person who's trapped inside a building because of snow or a collapse stay connected to the outside world and to reality. If coverage of the disaster is causing your station financial hardship, or if money or goods are needed to help cope with the effects of a disaster, Rich advises turning to your sponsors. If you need it during an emergency, your programming clock can provide opportunities for sponsorship. So work with your station's traffic department to flesh out possibilities. And then prepare a script. Providing standard formats will help your station fulfill its obligations to get on the air with breaking news. Even if it's someone who knows nothing, an amateur who needs to get the ball rolling until professional air staff can take over. Provide the script so that an amateur can just fill in the blanks and get the information out to the public. Script out what a person will say when a program is interrupted for an emergency. Script the questions a person should ask while screening a call for a possible live broadcast. Any non-professional broadcaster who may be pressed into duty does the following. Identify the name and title of the person either calling in or who's being called. Where are they located? Get the location of the incident or the person. What is the situation they want to report? Find out off air the name and contact number of the person who is coming on duty next, who can continue to provide information for you. When might an update on the situation become available? If you turn to page 247 in your Beyond Powerful Radio book, you'll see there in the middle of the page is a heading that says Successful Coverage Case Study, the Flood of the Century. I want you to please go and read that section, okay? It speaks about the flood and about the information, how it was gained and how it was relayed. And after something like a flood, after the worst is over, you may still have a lot of work to do, and people may still expect information from you. So provide it or tell them where to find it. If you voice track, make sure the talent recuts their tracks to reflect the breaking events. You might also want to tell listeners where else they can go in your market, ideally within your cluster, for information that will help them follow the aftermath of an emergency. Scott Hennen shares lessons he learned from the experience of covering the flood, that one that you have read just now. The flood, the one that the case study has been done on page 247 of Beyond Powerful Radio. These lessons may be useful to stations caught in a crisis that needs coverage, yet maybe without benefit of a large benefit of a large or any new staff. Cultivate relationships with professors of communications or journalism at local colleges or universities. Recruit the best students to potentially become reporters for your station. Have a budget for emergency supplies and equipment, or a trade account at a place where you can get them. Contact your best clients during the time of crisis and see what they can do to help. Don't forget to ask what you can do to help them. Make use of all media, video, web, radio, phones. You can set up a flood channel, an earthquake channel, or any other emergency channel within hours. Get out your contact files and remind yourself of whom you know. Friends and business associates will all want to help, and some of them may be experts. During the heat of the crisis, drop regular programming. Go to full coverage of what is happening. And then you get citizen journalism. So citizen journalism consists of the development and the delivery of content or stories via audiences and regular people, rather than via trained and experienced journalists who are paid to deliver such stories. In other words, this method of reporting involves citizens who are participating in the reporting and presenting of news and entertainment. The types of content that are shared by citizens as eyewitnesses can range from live and original reports and from big events or natural disaster sites to commentary and interviews of a more entertaining nature from outside the direct remit of the radio station. There are events that simply would not have been communicated in as much relevant detail to the world had it not been for citizens on the ground taking and sending photographs and sending texts and voice messages to their local radio stations and newsrooms. There are two benefits to incorporating citizen journalism into a radio station's content. Firstly, it really helps to have an army of listeners who can act as reporters across the radio station's broadcast footprint and who can get to places and experience things that a traditional radio reporter or presenter would not be able to access or necessarily be aware of until the event took place. Secondly, the content provided to the radio stations by citizens can offer a very realistic and human account of things as they are happening in real time. When there's a fire or a protest goes awry, a journalist might not be there at the time to witness and write about it. Citizen journalism, on the other hand, enables live, immediate eyewitness accounts of events and daily happenings. There are, however, risks involved in using citizen-sourced content. Without formal training and the obligations and regulations under which journalists operate, citizens can interpret information without factually reporting on it. They are therefore not necessarily adept at eliminating bias or removing their own opinion of the events that they have witnessed. This can lead to false information or conflicting views on the same incident. Such inaccurate details can be very damaging in a number of ways. They can lead to lawsuits, demands for on-air apologies and complaints, which may be escalated to tribunals, and the dismissal of the editorial or management staff. So they could be sent to the BCCSA and they could be asked to leave afterwards. With the evolution of the internet, ordinary people are increasingly publishing their own content and sharing it with media outlets like radio stations. These people are active participants in the media space rather than just consumers of information and entertainment. Helpfully, this provides a plethora of viewpoints, so different viewpoints. Specifically for people interested in particular subjects or events to understand different different points of view and approaches to these topics. This is where citizen journalism extends the life and conversation of on-air content off-air by providing post-mortems and in-depth analysis of things once they have taken place, which adds to the richness of those stories. If you turn to page 209 in Next Level Radio, close to the end, you'll see a case study there from Radio 702, where they used citizen journalism to launch a book. Please go and read that whole article. If we look back at this lecture, it's divided into two parts. The first is in case of emergency, and the second is citizen journalism. So in case of an emergency, the reality of consolidation of broadcast stations has left emergency preparedness in critical condition. A situation made worse when a crisis occurs in the middle of the night or on weekends when the bare bones staff is not at the station. It's more important than ever to tap into any and all available resources, even if they're unconventional, to cover the situation until things return to normal. Number 3 there, the best managers and staff of stations have a plan in place in case of emergency. Like the old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And citizen journalism there. Number 1, since many stations and media outlets have reduced or non-existent news staff, they have increasingly relied upon input from the citizenry as reporters and sources of sound and images for the input of raw information. Number 2, the eyewitness report is not new, but the advances in technology, such as recording devices, cameras in your phones, smartphones, and messaging services, have made the potential for citizen journalists universal. Number 3, the trained professionals are still ultimately responsible for checking the accuracy and credibility of the information that it actually used as news and information. I want you to do the following activity for me, please. Using the internet, select a story about a recent major local event. There's been quite a few around South Africa. And then on a Word document, describe a scenario that places you at the scene of this event and able to communicate with media outlets as a citizen journalist. However, the only service available to you is Twitter, which means you're now limited to communications in 140 characters or less. You may and should use text abbreviations. Okay, there's quite a few for you there. You may also cut out words down to their phonetic sounds rather than their actual spelling. Okay, so there's an example, later versus later. Then after you've written your piece, go to the top of your menu and click on Tools and then select Word Count from the drop-down menu. The characters with spaces will give you the exact count, which again must be 140 words or less. Which again must be 140 or less. For the 3 main parts of the event, the beginning, middle, and end, compose at least 2 tweets describing as much of the situation as clearly as possible. Remember, you are the eyes and the ears on the scene. Be certain to paint pictures with words, okay, as we've previously spoken about. You should also be able to answer the questions on page 210 of Next Level Radio, activity 5C, which says, provide 3 reasons as to why it is important to obtain audio sound bites for news and sport reporting. Number 2, briefly discuss vox pops with regard to their use in public opinion surveys, limited surveys and street polls. And number 3, provide a definition of citizen journalism and briefly describe 1 risk and 1 benefit of utilizing this kind of journalism on radio. Okay, and with that, we've come to the end of this lecture. We'll be continuing with this journey about news and sport and weather and traffic in the next lecture. So until then, I say goodbye. Bye.